I'm going to spend some time with you this morning at the first part of our morning talking about the changes that are going on in our world and in the church today and what Lead has learned. And hopefully this will help you kind of get a framework for where Holy Trinity fits in the landscape of leadership. I'm also going to introduce to you 5 growth indicators, and I'll explain more about that later. And then after the break, we're going to focus strictly on faith formation. The invitation for Coaching with Lead came from Darcy and Pastor Scott to focus on faith formation. And so we're going to spend the second part of our morning digging into that a little bit. Okay? Is this good?
Good.
Kind of what you came for? Okay. I want to say, I've listened to some of you who have talked about previous times when you've had people in from outside and you've worked on mission statements and things like that. That's not our goal today. That's something that you might want to take up down the road, and we'd be happy to accompany you in that. But today we're focused really on faith formation, kind of, I don't even want to say it as a slice of the pie of the congregation, because actually the whole congregation is part of helping pass on faith. But that really is our emphasis today. So here's some things to think about. How many of you have noticed the changes going on in our world? Right? So let me just ask, how many of you guys have Facebook accounts? Lots of you, but not everyone. I know. My husband lovingly calls it F-book, and I'm trying to get him in the mood. I know. Trying to get him in the mood for Facebook. It's not going that well. How about Twitter? We have some Twitter folks? A lot less. So we are being pushed into a changing world, and in many ways aggravated to take up new technologies, and we know it every time we get a new cell phone and we have to get used to it, right? Or every time our computer software changes. The truth is that we're part of a big mega change that's happening globally. This isn't just in Arizona or even in Chandler, Arizona, in the United States. This is a global shift that's happening in our world. And I want you to kind of catch that a little bit. In her book, Phyllis Tickle writes, every 500 years, the world and the church goes through a major do-over. Everything changes every 500 years. And you know, we're coming up on the anniversary of the Reformation, right? So guess what? We're at the end of the last 500 years, and there is a new 500-year window opening up. And we're part of this time. If you, like me, I remember as a child thinking it would have been so cool to be there when Luther was nailing the theses on the door. And I mean, it excited me as a kid to kind of wonder what it would have been like to be there when things were really happening in the church. Kind of felt like that as a kid anyway. Here we are. We're at the door, and things are really happening. And things are changing in spite of ourselves. So we're experiencing huge social, political, economic, and cultural shifts. I love Phyllis Tickle's language. She says every time we go through one of these things, the world and the church feels compelled to hold a giant rummage sale. Now, you know what I'm talking about. You've had these things, right? Where you take the stuff you no longer want, you either put it out in the yard or you put it in the garage, and you sell it. And the minute somebody comes along and they pick up your precious stuff that you didn't really want a little while ago, and they start looking at it, all of a sudden you think, well, maybe I really might not want to get rid of it. And then if they don't take it, you might put it under the table and keep it for yourself. You know what I'm talking about? It's this give and take about what we're going to get rid of and what we're going to keep. That's what she's talking about. We're in that kind of a place in the church. We're asking ourselves, what are the traditions that hold us dear and are who we are and are precious to our hearts that we cannot spare, because if we get rid of them, we're no longer who we are. And what are the things that must change? And without changing those things, our church isn't going to have a future. Now, we're going to talk about some of those things today and what we're learning with Lead. But that's kind of the place that we're all in. Here's the bright spot. She says every time, in the end, the mission of God is always larger than the previous version of the faith. Are you hearing me? Even though it feels like it's getting smaller, and the things that we love most seem to be we're struggling with, the good news is God is up to something new. And it's our job to listen and figure out what that is. And it will not be exactly like it is now. The next season of the Christian faith is going to bring a little of the past forward, but not all of it. And we get to be in that in-between space, which is, as you know, anytime you're in transition, is a little bit messy. That's where we're at. But we can hang on to this. The fact is that God has not left the planet. God is still working among people of faith. And the church will continue to be blessed by the Christian movement, maybe in a larger way than ever. Is that making sense? So here's some data on believing and belonging. I have tons of data. I'm not going to snow you with tons of data, although if you have questions about data, we can look at that. And for sure, those of you on the council and the listening team, if you want to look at some of that this afternoon or tomorrow afternoon, I've got a bunch of that. But this is the only data slide I want to put in front of you today that I'm giving you. I don't really know what you're going to have to experience with me. We'll take that up. But I thought this was staggering. If a child has two parents committed to the church, there is a 50% chance that they will be a lifelong believer. Let that settle in. Think about your own kids and your own grandkids. If both mom and dad are active in the church, it's only a 50-50 chance, right? Now, I have 5 young adult kids in my life, and I would say it's showing up in my family. So I have to buy this. If a child only has one parent committed to the church, there's only a 28% chance that they will be lifelong believers. So it cuts way back if it's only one parent. And if there are no parents coming to the church, it's only a 0.3% that somebody will become a lifelong believer. I don't know how this hits you, but it hit me like a rock when I heard this. This research has been out about a year. It comes actually from Nick Shepard, who's an ethnographer in London, England, but he's done this globally. This is not just a European statistic. This is a global research project. And what strikes me about this is that the role of mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are critical. They are critical in terms of faith formation, which is part of what we're here to talk about today. So those people around us who don't have their parents engaged, especially young people, are going to have a harder time actually coming into the faith. Any questions or thoughts about that? All right, hang in there with me. All right. So what I wanted to share with you this morning is actually the best things that we have learned through our work in LEAD that kind of takes up this changing landscape that we are in. You know, we didn't do anything to deserve this. It's just happening. We can't control it. We can't stop it. The world is changing around us, and it is what it is. But it is what the window we're called to be leaders in. And so I think it's our opportunity to embrace this. Now, last summer, not this summer, but last summer, I had an opportunity to hike the Inca Trail. Have any of you done that? Any of you here hike the Inca Trail? This is the first room I've been in where I haven't had somebody else who's been as crazy as I was. Okay, so you're a little saner. So are any hikers in this room? Yeah, that's what I figured. There's good hiking in Arizona. So I took a group. As part of our work with LEAD, we do cultural immersions in different countries, and one place we frequently go is Peru. And finally took a group to hike the Inca Trail. And so there are some things I learned while hiking the Inca Trail that I will use to shape our conversation today that help us think about what I'm seeing going on around the world with us. Okay, so the first thing I learned is that it is mind over matter. And I'm serious about this. How we think about what's going on makes all the difference. How you talk to yourself as an individual, how we think about ourselves as a leadership community, and how we even spend time with our families, how we think is huge. So what we say to ourselves really matters. So I was really excited about going to Peru, and I worked out and I exercised, and I'm probably the only person in the city of Houston who put on hiking boots and walked around the neighborhood, you know. And I did it for like 9 months because I knew I needed comfortable shoes, and so I had really invested in the preparation of this. Imagine my disappointment when I got to the trailhead and started walking and realized that I wasn't in shape. that the landscape was harder than I expected it to be. Actually, the incline was kicking my butt because I'm from Houston. We have no altitude, right? And I'm now hiking at 14,000 feet, and I'm really struggling. And I sort of thought I was in great shape, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I'm not doing that well. In fact, half the group was in front of me. I couldn't really keep up with them. And so I was like really upset with myself, and I was thinking, as I'm barely moving forward, you know, is this going to even work? It was really hard. I couldn't catch my breath. Well, you know what? I think that's where we are as a church. I think as a church, and I'm talking globally, I think as a church we cannot catch our breath. I think the changes I'm describing have been so fast and have moved us to a place where we are not equipped and skilled for the landscape that has changed around us, and we are out of breath. We have been trained and prepared for a leadership role that no longer fits the times in which we're leading because of these changes. And so if we keep doing what we've always done, as a matter of fact, it will help us to climb faster. Does that make sense? If you just keep doing what worked in the past, you will be faster, irrelevant to the future. And so I really feel like this. We are at a crisis where we cannot catch our breath in the church. We are out of breath. Well, it turns out walking 3 hours in my neighborhood to get in shape equals about 5 minutes in the Andes. Not kidding. Not kidding. And so there I was on the second day. And I'm just like, okay, seriously, these little rocks. And I'm climbing up these little rocks, and I'm going at the pace of a snail. And I'm hardly breathing. And by the second day, you cannot turn around. So there is no other option but to go forward. Okay? I had to do it. And my guide came alongside me, and he's like, "You're doing great." I'm like, "Really?" I know, right? That's a little positive affirmation, I guess. It's like, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And he said to me, "Well, you have to get a rhythm." I was like, "Huh?" That was all I could say. And he said, "How many steps can you take before you have to stop to rest? And how many steps and stop to rest?" He said, "Find a rhythm that works for you, a pattern of movement and rest, movement and rest." And so off he went, and I was left to ponder this. And I'm trudging along, and I'm thinking, I have really no choice. I've got to try it. I mean, what I'm doing right now is not working. So I began to count my steps. And I realized I could go 12 steps before I had to stop and catch my breath. Now, 12 steps is not much. And I'm starting to think I may never get to our destination for the evening. But I'm sticking with this plan, and I'm 12 steps and I'm resting. I'm 12 steps and I'm resting. Once I started doing that, I realized I actually could pray the Lord's Prayer and rest. And, in my head, and pray the Lord's Prayer and rest. It was working. And once I could pray and rest, and pray and rest, you guys, I could see how beautiful the Andes were. But until I got out of my panic, right, about breathing, I couldn't even enjoy the absolute beauty of the place around me. I was thinking myself into a panic, and it was a problem. And the only thing that changed for me moving from a panic to actually enjoying the walk, I mean, just like breathtakingly beautiful, was the way I was thinking about it. I was not in any better shape. That guide had not given me any magic, right? The only thing that changed was my head, how I was thinking. I think this is really, really important for us in the church today. How we think about what we're doing will either stop us or move us forward. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't have got there without Oswaldo coming beside me. I'd have never thought of this on my own, for sure. I was just so freaking out. And so I really needed an outside voice to come beside me and to say, get a rhythm. I think that's what Neil and I can do for you today, and have hopefully been doing, and will do in the future as we continue to coach your staff, is to be a guide, to to walk alongside. We don't bring all the answers, but like Oswaldo taught me, like a small little gift, we hope we can give some of those gifts to you that will help you actually get your own pace and make your own decisions about how you move forward. This whole concept of mind over matter is huge. So I hope you catch that in what I'm saying. We'll come back to that. So it turns out, as I've been listening to leaders, that, and I've listened to 209 pastors, actually can add 211 now after yesterday, so 211 pastors one-on-one, and over 200 lay leaders like yourselves in doing this work with LEAD. It turns out I can actually identify 4 categories where I find leaders to be fitting today. And I'm guessing you'll be able to see yourself in this. So there are leaders who are growing, leaders who are out of breath, like I was on the Inca Trail, leaders who are stalled, and leaders who are becoming. And our 4 categories can actually fit on a grid. You have this on a handout, by the way, so you don't have to try to write it down. I really want you to have this in front of you so that you can refer to it and take it with you to ponder, okay? So at the top of the grid, we have LEAD's mission statement. These are leaders who are growing a deep, bold, consequential faith in Jesus. When I'm talking about deep, I mean people who are doing faith practices, who are committed to prayer and study and worship life, and to serving, who are living out of their sense of call and their faithful response to what it is to be a follower of Jesus on the planet. That's what I'm talking about with deep. When I'm talking about bold, I'm talking about people who are growing other people. It takes courage. It's one thing to like grow yourself. It's another thing to, I heard a story last night of someone saying that their, I think it was an aunt, who said, you know, you need to baptize your child. And that was a game changer in that person's life as they got their child baptized and they became active in this congregation. So we need actually to become bold enough to help other people grow. Those of us, especially those of you who are in this room, you're the leader people. You're called to do more than just practice the faith yourself. You're called to accompany others. I mean, we have to do it. There's nobody else, even if we don't feel comfortable with it. That's what leadership is. It's influence. And then we've got this consequential. That's doing things that matter. Okay? Because actually, there are a lot of stuff we do, and I'm going to just say it out loud, in every church, including this one, that we could stop doing. That probably doesn't matter. Right? But there are a lot of things that do matter. And we have to distinguish that. So deep, bold, consequential faith, that's at the top of the grid. At the bottom is a static faith in Jesus. I'm not talking about saying that we have no faith, and I'm not even qualifying how faithful people are. What I am commenting on, though, is the activity of their faith, and I'm owning that. On the one side, we have risk-taking and innovating. We have people who will try new things, and on the other side, we have people who will play it cautious, right? They're really concerned about taking on chances and risks, and they are slower to make those kinds of changes. This is the grid that we're working with, and I can actually listen to leaders and sort of place it in these boxes. Our job with LEAD is to help the out-of-breath and the stalled people move up to becoming and growing. You know, that's our job. That's what we're here to help you with your congregation and with you yourself. So let's look quickly at the attributes of each of these. So leaders who are growing, most of the time they're leading to learn. What that means is they're excited about learning new things. They're committed to their own personal development. They're intentionally finding ways to grow other people. They are innovating, taking risks, discerning vision. And I call that a casting vision style. Okay, so let me tell you, this is how I'm doing this at my house. I have 5 kids, I have 4 grandchildren. I started thinking, what do I want to give my grandkids for Christmas when I became a grandma? Like, not just stuff that they'll donate later. You know what I mean? How can I give them something that will have value and substance? And so I decided I was going to influence my grandkids in the faith. And every year I write them a Christmas letter. A story about what I've seen in their life, in the first year about their birth, but then, you know, what I've seen in their life, and also about what I see going on in the world around us. I've written about immigration. I've written about, the struggles of our times. But I also write about my faith in Jesus and my prayer for them in their faith life. Now, my oldest grandchild is 3.5 now, and my daughter said, I think you can start reading her letters. And I'm thinking, maybe not yet. I mean, she's bright and everything, but probably not yet. But the point is that when we think about influencing other people, sometimes those other people are right in our own family, right? That might be our greatest influence, and that is good stuff. So that's one leadership style. The next one is out of breath. These are people who are learning to lead, and honestly, it's because the landscape has changed. A lot of our pastors actually fall in this category because when they went to seminary, and Pastor Scott and I talked about this yesterday, when they went to seminary, they weren't expected to be like these visionary leaders. That was not in the training that they received. But the world has changed so fast, and the seminaries have struggled so much to keep up, and all of us are struggling with our continuing ed to keep up because of the stuff changing, that actually we are still learning to be leaders. What that looks like is we're often tired, we're over-functioning, and that kind of overwork and over-functioning makes us indecisive. We're spiritually drained, and kind of the word burnout comes to mind. A lot of times with leaders, and this is lay leaders too, they've sort of been through it in a congregation. In other words, they've tried to do something new, some people didn't like it and got mad at them, and so they're never trying that again. I mean, we've got a lot of people like that who don't want to get their toes stepped on and don't want to make somebody mad. The last thing they want is to create conflict in their congregation, and so they sort of stand back. This leadership style I call building consensus. Then we have the stall category. These are folks who are done learning, who are pretty much saying, look, I don't want any more learning. It is what it is. I am where I am. And more importantly, they're people who will look to the past as better. You know who these people are because they'll be always quoting the past, and anything that's happening now is bad. And actually, there's bad stuff in the past too. And there's good stuff in the future. There's good and bad everywhere. So, but they don't have that worldview. And often it's an authoritative kind of leadership. And then finally, we have this new or becoming. I like to use the word becoming, actually, more than new, because these are folks who are just learning that they have influence. These are not just our young leaders. It is our campus ministry students. It is the young people that we're raising up in the church. But guess what? It's also our newly retired people. I think about my husband, who's going to be retiring in 3 years, and he can't wait to have time on his hands to serve God in interesting ways. He'll all of a sudden have time, right? And he has lots of capacity. So it's not about an age, it's about a mindset and what God is doing. This leadership style I think of as networking. So you've got a little card on your table. This is the lead check-in card. And let me give you a disclaimer before you fill it out. I want this back, okay? This is really from me. Because, like it or not, by virtue of being in the room, we're going to learn from you, okay? We want you to give us feedback. And feedback number 1 would be to indicate where you kind of see yourself on this, if you're new, stalled, out of breath, or growing. And let me give you some info on the bottom where it says your name. I love your name. Email address only if you want to be added to the Lead weekly blog. Okay, so straight up, if you give me your email address, we are going to add you to the weekly blog. So if you don't want that, now let me say this: you can say yes, get the weekly blog, and if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe. But I don't want you to think I'm not going to do that. I want to be really upfront with you.
It's good stuff, though. So if you get it, so. you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope so. It's very good stuff. And if it's not, you should tell us so we make it better. Right? Anyway. We're just working on number 1 here. Where it has the check, though, follow up with me about coaching, you don't need to worry about it because you're already in. So, yeah. Or you can check it since you're already in. So just take a second and circle whatever one makes sense for you.
Is new equivalent to becoming?
It is. I'm sorry. Here's what we're doing with Lead. We are receiving critique everywhere we go, and I'm changing the language based on the critique we're getting. And the word new was not resonating, especially with our younger people. So we've changed it to becoming, which they really like. And I guess I haven't updated the handout. or the PowerPoint, but I will. The one that you have is our most recent handout. This one on your table is the most recent information we have. And our website is up to speed. So, yeah, be becoming. Again, remember, becoming is not about an age. Don't think too hard about it. All right. So by day 3 on the Inca Trail, I've got my rhythm. I've got my poles, which I think are like completely glued into my hands because I can't imagine doing this without. On day 3 on the Inca Trail, you're actually going down 3,000 little steps. Yeah, 3,000 little steps. And they're like this wide. They're super thin because the Incans are small people. And by the way, as I'm on this trail, our guides and our porters are running past me. I wish I were kidding. They're running past me, and they have our tents on their back, and they have our food. They're like loaded down. I've got hardly this little thing with water in it, you know, but they've got all this stuff, and they're running high, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I've got the poles, and we are walking now down these little steps, and it's a little easier than because you can breathe, but then there's the whole falling thing. So I'm not really going all that fast, even on the downhill. And I realized that everyone has a rhythm. So I think my guide was getting around because everyone has a rhythm. And really, by listening to the rhythm of others, I kind of knew who they were. Like, Karsten had this click, 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 click with his poles. Whenever I catch up to him, I could hear him. But Sherry behind me, she was more like me. Click, 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 click. She was slower. Each of us kind of had our own pace in which we were hiking the Inca Trail. What I learned in working with this community that I was part of is the gift of the generations and the gift of the cross-cultural community. And I want to share something with you about that. So the second big thing I learned was about this cross-cultural and cross-generational gifts that I think are very underestimated in our church. We need to widen our options here. Like when I look even at this room, we don't have a lot of young people in the room. I'm really glad we have some of you. But we don't have, the generations are more similar in this room, which means we're missing something, quite honestly. We had 22 people in our group when we hiked the Inca Trail. We had Peter, who was 12 years old, all the way up to this lovely German couple who were 76 and 78. They were awesome. And I want to tell you, there was as much respect in our group for Peter, who was 12, as there was for the German couple. And you could have lined us up by our age on how fast we walked. Yeah, seriously, Peter was always at the head of the line. I mean, almost running. And his mother and dad after him. And then as we got older, we got, you know, it was kind of the crescendo of age. And the last people in at the end of the day was the German couple. They often came in, always came in actually after dark, and often left earlier in the morning than the rest of us because their pace was just a different pace. But when we sat together in the tent at night, and we began to just kind of unwind from the day, which, by the way, getting up, you know, from that was like the hardest part of the day for me. Anyway, when we sat there, and the porters who had been running by us and setting up our tent and cooking for us came in and joined us. It was the Holy of Holies in that tent. We had the young people sharing their stories. We had the elders sharing their stories. We had the Peruvians giving us the history, helping us to understand the social media that the Inca Trail was, for the Peruvians back in the Incan Empire, right? This is how they connected to one another, was by running these trails. And they taught us all about this. That richness, that cross-culturalness was huge, huge. I think we need to look at our congregations around that, and especially since our conversation today is about faith formation. So this grid that I gave you that we focused on in terms of growing leaders individually for us also works in terms of congregations. We have congregations that are growing. In the Gulf Coast Synod, where I come from, we have 117 congregations on our roster. We have 30 congregations that are growing, if I'm really generous. If I want to be a little more, I don't know, strategic about the way I look at those numbers, and Bishop Mike doesn't really want this getting out everywhere, but in all honesty, for transparency for our relationship, we really only have about 17 growing congregations out of 117 congregations. You see what I'm saying? So, and so if growing is more than adding like 1 or 2 families or 1 or 2, and remember when I'm talking about growing, I'm talking about deeper in faith and wider in mission. I'm not talking just about butts in the pews. I think that metric is not a helpful metric. It's only one metric, I should say it that way. But growing is, it's not where the majority of our congregations are. And in the ELCA, the average size congregation has about 200 people in worship. So you're a little above average. And I hope that makes you feel good, because it's true. We have congregations that are out of breath, seriously out of breath. And then we've got some who are stalled, and we do have some new or becoming congregations. I want to talk to you about some of the metrics that move from one to the other here now, okay? And I don't think I put this in there, no. It's not in there, sorry. My team isn't actually ready for me to give this out in print yet. We're in the process of writing this stuff up, and if November and December go well, there'll be a book on this. We'll see. I'm not 100% sure, but that's the goal. So, as I've been listening to congregations and doing work like I'm doing with you, here I've realized that there are 5 growth indicators that make a difference on how a congregation gets plotted on whether it is in the growing, out of breath, stalled, or becoming category, okay? Now, I know a lot of people hate categories. I get that. But I do want to say this. Please hear this from me. I'm talking about a starting place. LEAD is a year and a half in doing this work, and we have to have a place to start, and I want our congregations to have a place to start. This is not a destination, this is a beginning. And we have to have a benchmark. That's why this is a metric. So that in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, you, I hope, will be able to look back and you will be able to see places where you are indeed growing because of the conversations that we're having today. And it may not look like a ton more people who are in worship every Sunday. Okay, we're going to get to that. It may look very different because when we're talking about growing in faith, coming to worship, obviously people who are faithful want to worship, I certainly do. But I also know that there are other voices in that conversation and that people will find worship in other ways. So we can talk about that. You may disagree. But here are the different categories, okay, and the indicators that we've learned. The first is around identity. Congregations with a clear identity are growing. Just look at the growing box. Skip over becoming. Those are congregations that have a clear purpose and a clear set of values. If you ask the question, why does this congregation exist? People have an answer to that question. I'm not talking about a mission statement. A mission statement is fine. I'm not against them. But that, in most cases, is either hanging on a wall somewhere or in a file cabinet somewhere, and it does not shape the life of the church. I'm talking about why we exist. Okay? And one of the questions you had, and you're listening in, is if this congregation disappeared, what would be missed? That's a question that gets to how do people right now understand the purpose of this congregation? Okay? And that's a starting place. What we heard and the answers of that are not what we hope to hear in the next 5 or 10 years. But it's what we had now. And you gotta know now in order to go forward. Congregations that are growing, they are engaged in their local community. And we'll come back to that when we look at out of breath. They're intentionally growing leaders of all ages. Like they have a plan for what happens when new people come to the church. They have a plan for how we are helping mom and dad understand that they are the primary faith formers in the home, and we might have parenting classes, we might have resources or parenting groups that are helping mom and dad do their ministry in the home, or helping grandma and grandpa be amazing faith grandparents. They're taking that seriously. Preaching and music are indigenous and excellent. And I like it in that order because excellent is a category that matters where you are. Like one excellent in one congregation is not so excellent in another congregation. So you have to have an indigenous, whatever makes sense in any particular congregation as excellent. And because we're all serving different people. And congregations that are growing have a vision that inspires leaders around finances and supports the staff. Their governance frees mission. So I have to speak on that one. Governance is not a sexy topic. Frankly, I never thought I would care about governance. But in the last year and a half, I realized, wow, I gotta care about governance. So for the first time, we're having a governance seminar in November in Houston, where we're trying to help leaders get after the governance questions. This would be a couple of congregational council people and pastoral staff coming to spend 2 days together learning about governance. And I'm not the speaker. This is not my area of expertise. I'm going as a student because I have a lot to learn about this. But governance, what I'm talking about, governance is clarity of role. What is the work of the staff? What is the work of the council? What is the work of ministry teams? It's understanding clarity of how decisions get made and who does what. So growing congregations, they have figured this out, or they're at least in the process of figuring it out. Let's look at out of breath. For out of breath congregations, their identity is very abstract. They kind of know what their values are. I mean, they kind of know we care about kids in this place. They kind of know that music matters here. They kind of know, but you can ask 15 people and get 15 answers. There's no alignment around our purpose, okay? They are disconnected from the community, but I want to say something about that. They are usually the congregations that have 10 million groups being hosted there. Now, I heard a lot of that yesterday. You guys have a lot of people that landlord and use your facilities here. That's a great way to serve the community. That way of serving the community, however, will never help the people who come onto your campus get to know the amazing grace-filled theology that Lutheran Christians have to share, right? They're not encountering who you are and what you believe. They're encountering your building. And your building speaks a little bit, but it doesn't speak enough. I have some stories I'll get back to. They are struggling to engage leaders of any age. They have worship and music quality that is very unpredictable. Some weeks it's great, some weeks not so great. They have their finances lead their vision. That means the question that's asked when we say, we have this new idea, here's what we want to do, the number one question isn't tell me more about the vision, it's how much will it cost, can we afford it? You see that? When we lead around if we can afford it, we're out of breath. Because what that's saying is we are really believing that the Holy Spirit can inspire us to give more and can bring that money in which we need to carry this out. We're sort of playing God a little bit and not trusting that God is in the midst of this vision. And if God is in the midst of this vision, somehow the finances are going to work out. Now, I know that seems dicey if you're a person who has fiscal responsibility, and I do for LEAD, so I get that. But at the same time, if you drive the bus in leadership focused on only making sure the books balance, I guarantee you your congregation will continue to decline. It is a foregone conclusion. The finances are not the ministry of the church. I'm just saying the hard stuff to you, okay? And you have over-functioning staff in these out-of-breath congregations, and governance is an obstacle. In other words, if somebody wants to do something new, they don't really know how to get that to happen. And maybe, and I don't know really about Holy Trinity because I haven't actually asked this question, But in some congregations I've worked with, if I wanted to do something new, let's say I'm a young member of the congregation, I'm a young mom, and I want to start a young moms group. And so what I want to do is I want to not just like do it in my house, I want it to be part of my congregation's ministry. And so in order to make that happen, I have to figure out which committee I have to go to ask permission. So maybe I talk to the pastor and he says, or she says, it's the Faith Formation Committee. So then they go to the Faith Formation Committee and they say, wow, that's kind of a big deal. It might cost money. We probably have to take that to the church council. So then it goes to the church council. The church council actually doesn't have time that month to talk about it, so it waits till the next month. Then they get around to talking about it. The church council doesn't feel like they have enough information to make a decision. And so they send it back to the committee, who sends it back to the woman who had the idea in the first place, who now 4 months later doesn't care anymore, right? Yeah. And I don't know that that's happening here, but this is what I see in a lot of places. When a system like that happens, it tells me we aren't expecting new things to happen. We're not creating a space where new things can happen. And friends, I have to be honest with you. If you're serious about faith formation and you start growing people's faith, God is going to do something. They're going to want to try something new. They're going to have ideas because God doesn't just work through an elected council system. God works to all of us. And they're going to get excited and they're going to come with ideas, and you need a permission-giving model. You need a way in which that happens. And maybe you have it. I don't know. But I see this as a challenge in the out-of-breath category. All right, let's look at stalled. Stalled, we have the identity, the purpose is us. Now, I work with congregations who are stalled all the time. I'm sad to admit that there are some congregations I meet with that, because I'm in Texas, we have a lot of rural congregations who have property, who have cemeteries, and they will tell me flat out the purpose of our congregation is to make sure we can maintain the cemetery. Let that soak in. We care more about the people buried in the ground than we do the ones walking around on the ground, although we are people who are Easter people. It doesn't connect. It doesn't connect. And they will tell you this. So, this is an inward purpose. They are, in terms of how they listen only to their members, which is actually a challenge for them because they're having fewer and fewer members. In fact, it's so inwardly focused. In terms of what's happening in terms of the sense of belonging, they are recycling leaders like nobody's business. Like I sat at one committee meeting and I said, so, just as an opener, how long have you been serving on this role for Christian education? And one woman looked to the other and she said, when I married your son 28 years ago, you invited me onto this committee and I think I'm the last new person. Wow. Oh my gosh. Y'all have all been here over 28 years. Yes. So, okay, that tells you something about why their Christian education is not connecting, right, with the changing world. Because they haven't brought in new thinking. They've been thinking in a tunnel. And when we think in a tunnel like that, it starts out pretty good because our ideas are fresh and good, but over time that tunnel just gets smaller and we start recycling our ideas and we start recycling our members. The reason we recycle members, I think, is 3 reasons. One, because actually we only want to ask the people we trust, right? That we know will actually do a good job. It matters to us, and we don't want to just hand this over willy-nilly to somebody who we don't think will do a good job. The second reason we recycle leaders is, frankly, because, you gotta hear this with love. We've been doing this so long and we're really good at it, which means new people are kind of freaked out because they don't want to work that hard. They don't really know if they can do it. They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to fail. And so even if we take a chance and we ask a new person and they're looking at you, who's been the expert in this for quite a while, they're not going to feel like they can be you and they can do it. And so they'll back off. And so your expertise and lack of understanding of how to mentor causes us to recycle leaders. And the third reason I think we recycle leaders, honestly, is because it's easier. It's just easier. But it's not helpful. So in our stalled congregations, worship and music are usually very weak. And what's driving worship and music in our small congregations are relationships. Okay? So we love our organist. she's been our organist for 30 years, and we can't hurt her feelings now that she really is having a hard time physically, and she's not actually able to learn the new music that we wish she could do. We love her so much that we don't want to let her go. And this kind of stuckness, when we love people, loving people is really important, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. But when we make our love for the person the priority over what we might have to move to if we want our congregation to grow, it's a trap. It's an emotional trap. And I'm not saying we want to ditch that organist. I want to say we have to love her enough to tell the truth in love and to help her find another place. My husband calls it repotting. In his work, he's in construction. He said, you don't have to repot people all the time. It doesn't mean that they're not any good. It means that they're in the wrong place. And maybe you have to do that. Maybe she becomes the organist for only one service. And maybe there's another service that has a different kind of music like. Anyway, I don't know. But this is what I see. And finances are stopped. The finances stop the vision. There's really no visioning in this case because actually at this point a congregation is on life support. They're living off of an endowment. They're living off of 2 or 3 families that are big givers, and they can't really do anything but survive. Okay? And they're freaking out probably that they won't be able to pay a pastor's salary soon. And their governance is about control. Are you seeing the differences? I know it's not really this clear. I know these lines should be dotted lines because it's not this hardcore. But these are the things that we're seeing that are making a difference in congregational life. And I wanted to bring you my best stuff because I really want to see Holy Trinity be able to move forward. And just a couple of them on the becoming. So you're still discovering their purpose and value. A becoming congregation is a new congregation that might be a new mission plan. Or it might be a congregation that's decided we've been stalled a while, but we want to be transformed. Or we've been out of breath a while and we want to be transformed. And so they move into the becoming box. It's before their growth. And in our becoming, our vision leads our finance. I want to say about money a minute. None of these categories, none of these congregations ever feel like they have enough money. Ever. Even if they're growing, they're short on money because they need to add more staff they can't afford. It doesn't matter. Every congregation you meet with will tell you they don't have enough money. The question isn't how much money you have. The question is how you think about it. It's mind over matter, right? Questions about this, you guys? I'm giving you lots.
In your experience, are there any, you mentioned worship attendance earlier, 200, and we're at 325 or whatever. Is there anything about numbers of critical care or congregation worship-wise as the number gets to a point where these become significantly harder? For sure.
Thank you for asking that, Pastor Lee. I sure can. Yeah, I didn't put that on there, but there is. I'm still not 100% ready to write it down, but here's my hunch, okay? Here's what I see and I've experienced and I think this is so interesting. Let's start with stall. Our congregations that move into stall are for sure congregations that have less than 100 people in worship. Are stall, for sure. Now, what's very interesting about that is many of our becoming congregations have less than 100 people in worship. It's how they're thinking about it. So I did some work consulting with the church council that is bemoaning the decline of their congregation out of the country in Texas, and they only had 100 people in worship on Saturday. And on Sunday, I went to a Latino congregation that has 100 people in worship, and it was like busting at the seams with joy about this. It's their worldview about their numbers that's part of the problem. That's why I'm not quite sure how to put it on a chart, because it's how you think about your numbers. But once a congregation that has been larger declines to about 100, here's why they panic. It takes about 120 average givers in a congregation to pay one pastor's salary. Okay? About 120, in an average congregation, about 120 people worshiping to pay a pastor's salary. So now that we're worshiping and we have only 100 people showing up, we're really panicking about can we keep our pastor. That's a big deal. And maybe a few more people are giving more so that they can do it, or they're drawing on a savings or an endowment plan. But there's a real challenge around that for them. And actually, it makes it very hard for them to take a risk, maybe a risk that they need to take about adding a staff person that might help them move. But when I've seen, for example, St. James Lutheran Church in Houston that went through this, they took a risk and they added a Latino pastor to their staff at 100. Actually, I mean, to be really truthful, they had about 40 people worshiping on Sunday, okay? I mean, they said they had 100, but I never saw it. And I don't know how they were counting, but it was really about I know. Counting is, in the eyes of the counter. But, so they had a very declining small group of a congregation, but they had a pastor who was sticking with them. He was nearing retirement, but he was sticking with them. Really great pastor. And through their work, they listened into their neighborhood and they determined, it wasn't really hard to figure out that they were in a Latino community and that if they wanted to have a life, what they need to call a Latino pastor. They agonized on this for years. They grew smaller in that time. But they finally did it. Pastor Aura Suarez came as a lay pastor, and she's now going through the team program in the ELCA. She'll be ordained next spring. She's dynamite, and the congregation is growing. And they have both an English and Spanish-speaking services. And the community is working. What's very interesting is that the English-speaking pastor did retire, and Pastor Aura, who is bilingual, was leading both services, but the neighborhood's changed again. Just in the last 18 months, my son and daughter-in-law actually moved into this community, and there's a lot of young professionals moving back into this part of Houston. And so they have just recently contracted with a part-time English-speaking white pastor to try to reach out to them. Like, they've caught the rhythm of serving now and taking chances, but there was a moment, a pretty dark moment for them, right? So back to your numbers question. I find the out-of-breath category is a congregation that has 300 to 250 in worship that used to be larger and has not changed how they do what they do. Now, this isn't every congregation in that numeric range, but when we have had a bigger staff, and now we don't have that staff, but we're still doing the stuff we did when we had the bigger staff. When we don't make decisions about stop doing the Christmas program, even though nobody wants to really do it, but we've always done it, and we're not really good Lutherans if we don't do it. And so we're killing ourselves to put this together. That's what I'm talking about. They can't help but get out of breath. They're exhausted from trying to push a ball up a hill with fewer people pushing the ball up the hill, right? And they need to scale back. The canary in the mine shaft on this is Sunday school, which is what I got invited to talk to you guys about. It's always the first tell. Congregations that are struggling with Sunday school always are congregations that are worshiping really around 250 and less. It's hard to keep that Sunday school machine, which is a machine, and I'll talk about later, that was built on the back of volunteers, going in a world that has changed like our world has changed, when we don't have a zillion stay-home moms who want to dedicate their lives to this. So the engine that made Sunday school function included a pool of volunteers and included a certain number of families. If those things are not there, it moves a congregation in out of breath like that. Okay, so you can see this is not clear answers. Growing congregations can be any size, any size. I believe every congregation can grow. I'm very, very committed to that. I'm serious about it. I've seen it happen, and I'll share some stories of it. And becoming congregations, again, any size. But where we really see the struggle are in the last two columns. Is that helpful? Other questions? You guys with me on this? I'm giving you a lot to think about.
Question. So have you seen large congregations that have become stalled?
Yes.
So this becomes almost like a marketing cycle, basically, for congregations to, they realize they're stalled and then they need to reinvent themselves.
Right. In fact, often what stalls a growing congregation is like a crisis, a leadership change. So I can tell stories on the Gulf Coast Synod all day since they're not in the room, right? Sexual misconduct in a large congregation by a pastor. That congregation is going to spin its wheels for a few years till they kind of work out of the pain and the shock of that. Even though they might still have 700 people worshiping every Sunday, they're like comatose. There's a vibrancy that has left them. There's a pain and suffering among them that isn't attracting new people. Visitors come and go because it's not like a place I want to raise my kids in the faith now, because the people are kind of grieving still. That kind of thing can mess up a growing congregation. The other thing that can mess up a growing congregation, honestly, is, again, the way we're thinking. Like if there is a growing congregation, and we do see this a lot, the members of the congregation, we call it the donut syndrome, drive over the neighborhood to come to church. This will eventually stall a congregation. Because at some point, depending on that donut, like the church is here, the neighborhood around the church is not where any of the members live and beyond. Maybe people are driving 20, 30, 50, even an hour. I know of some people who drive over an hour to get to their church because their whole family comes together on Sunday morning. It's where the generations connect, and the grandparents might be there and the kids want to come. And my daughter drives 30 minutes to come to church with me, so I mean, we're part of this kind of deal. And she's there more than I am, I confess, because I'm here. But, it's true. But I love it because when I am there, it's my grandchildren. But, the truth is that in a growing congregation, as that donut grows and people move farther and farther kind of away from the neighborhood, it can actually move them into stalls. But it doesn't mean that they can't deal with that. Now, there are some congregations, by the dynamics of their location, are what we call regional churches. So they might have some people in the neighborhood, but the majority of the people don't live there, and it's working for them. So it's not the only way. But I personally have a bias. Oh, sorry. Wake up call. I personally have a bias about connecting in the community around you, if not like the 10 square blocks around you, at least in the community around you, because I believe that congregations are in a location for a reason. That's my personal bias. I don't really have research on that. Yeah.
I don't know where you are in your work with Holy Trinity, but are you at liberty to say, or do you even have enough information to state which category we fall under?
That is not my call. But I'm not saying that to just get me off the hook here. What I would like to do is invite you guys to do a beta testing survey on this. We'll put together an assessment. It's an assessment, not a survey. It's an electronic assessment. There are 20 questions. And if you're in on this, that's a decision your church council can make, I think. But if you're in on this, then we would ask you guys, and we want at least 10 or more people from a congregation to do this assessment because, we all kind of see through our angle of vision and we would like to have a broader view. The assessment places the congregation on the leadership landscape on those 4 quadrants. We're also working on an individual one. The individual one's not ready to be tested yet, but the congregational one is. And we're going to be sending it out actually next week. I've got about maybe 50 or 60 congregations that have been willing to be beta testers. So if y'all want to do that, here's where it would really help us. Because if the result comes back and you completely disagree with it, like as a council, you look at it, you're saying, okay, well then we have the wrong questions, okay? I mean, it's a beta test. We're trying to do this well, but we're not Myers-Briggs. We haven't done this for a really long time and nuanced every scientific question. We're still figuring that out, which is why the beta test. There's no charge for it in the beta testing process. Ultimately, we'll probably have a small fee attached to this, but we're not there yet because we don't know that we have the right questions. So if you're up for being guinea pigs on this, we would so welcome that. But I don't want to take a shot at that, to be honest. It almost doesn't matter what I think. Yeah.
I think what's interesting, though, is when I filled out the card, I was thinking one thing, and you went through this, and I changed my card.
Fine, that's fine.
And I think it's not important what this is amazing information. I'm looking at this and like, wow, and it changed my card. And I think it's so important what we, as the congregation, and those of us who are, you know, the council members, leaders of the congregation, and we look at this, and I think it's really important that we be honest.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
there's
we
no
have
other
to be
point,
honest.
honestly.
You know, if we're here and you're here to help us, and I think the most important thing is that we here, we have to be honest at where we think we are.
I just have to put an exclamation point behind that. And here's the deal. Nobody cares about Holy Trinity Lutheran Church like you. No one. This is your congregation. This is where you come to be in a faith community that matters to you, right? This is like the life of us. I mean, my congregation for me is my extended family. I'm guessing that's true for you too. So if we don't tell the truth, we're really hurting ourselves. Absolutely, you need integrity in how you fill that out. And the beauty of the beta testing, if you do it electronically, is there is no name attached when you get the results. That's one reason we thought the electronic survey, there's no handwriting analysis possible. You know? It is completely anonymous. And we do ask you to register with your name and your email address. But no, when we give the report, it doesn't give a list of the people who filled it out. We will say how many people contributed to this, but we won't send the pastors the list or anything, okay? So, I know, right? Sorry, good try. But the generations really matter in this. I guess I should mention some of that.
Question over here, John.
I'm sorry, yes.
Well, it seems to me like you could be in one of these categories that for each be different for the your identity could be one. Then you don't have to be growing the whole thing or becoming the whole thing. Some of the items you might be better in a growing situation. Some of the items you might be stalled in.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And the report you'll get from the analysis, it's exactly how it will come back to you. And this is really important because let's imagine you decided to go to work on this stuff. Where do you start? Okay? Here's where I want you to start, but you would have to choose for yourself, and I would support you in this, but my bias is you got to start with identity. I feel like you have to know who you are. And the more clear you are on that, the better the rest of this is going to come together. The listening process actually informs the identity, so there are two sides of a coin, really. In fact, LEAD has a product called the 10-Minute Toolbox, and when I wrote the 10-Minute Toolbox on identity, I had to put the listening stuff in there, so it has like this bonus 10-minute toolbox because they fit together in my head. Because our identity isn't just how we see ourselves, but it's how others, kind of the 360 kind of thinking. You want that in your identity. But then, what would you do next? I would build on my strengths. I would say, what if the next thing, now, and I want to tell you, I have a couple people on my board arguing with me about the order of this. They think belonging trumps building on your strengths. They think you should go from identity and listening to the area of belonging, which Neil's going to talk to you about after our break. I get why they say that, but I really believe that we need some wins, you know? We need to feel good about what we're doing, and it's hard. And so if we can start on our strength, let's imagine Holy Trinity discovers, if they do the assessment, that yes, we can clarify our identity, and we are listening in the community. Those things are happening. What might we look at next? And let's say you're really strong in belongs, you're really weak in gathers or learns. I would want you to start with belongs. I want you to feel the good growth that can come out of that. If we always work out of our deficit, it's really hard to gain ground. So we want to have an asset approach, in my opinion. Other questions about this? You guys are really helping me think about the work we're doing. This is very, very helpful. I do want to share just a couple of stories, or maybe even just one. Looking at our time, I'll probably just tell one so that I can not keep us late for our break at 10:30. So my home congregation is a story that I can easily talk about. Faith Lutheran Church in Bel Air, Texas, which is inside the loop in Bel Air. Bel Air is a little city inside of the city of Houston near the medical center. The congregation went through a crisis around the church-wide action that actually, I would just say this, it happened about 5 years earlier. And around this conversation about how do we feel about the gay and lesbian conversation. They went through a huge crisis around that, and a pastor, our senior pastor at that time, sort of took the stand of being pro that, and the congregation reacted, and some really bad things happened. And not only did some members leave, but so did he. And I mean, everybody got wounded. It was a very dark time. I'm going to be really honest. In fact, there was a member of the congregation who even filed a lawsuit against the pastor. It was like, I don't think you could do that, so don't do that. But it was really bad, really bad. And I mean, this pastor was a dear friend of mine, so it was really hard on us personally to watch all this unfold in our congregation. And a congregation that goes through a hard time like that, it takes a while to recover. So we called an interim pastor, an intentional interim, who actually, in my opinion, stayed too long. He was there almost 3 years. I didn't think he'd ever leave. But it's okay. I'm very, I'm antsy. And I'm not there enough, so I really can't say anything. I'm just watching from the sidelines. But the congregation moved it was growing when all this started happening, but they dived deep into stalled. I mean, they just bottomed out. And people left, they went to other churches, young people stopped coming. I mean, I went to church on Christmas Eve. And, usually you want to go early so you can get a good seat. Shoot, there was hardly anyone in the parking lot. Christmas Eve, so it was very stalled. They were really panicking about money. They have a big campus. The interim pastor was fantastic. He stabilized the congregation. He was able to move them forward. They moved with his leadership from stalled to out of breath. They didn't really move into becoming or into growing, but they did take a step out of the hole. I would say that, and I was really pleased at that and how that worked out. Because of the work I do and because I'm a member, they endure me and they began listening in their community. Okay, they began a process of doing the listening in and out. So when they were ready, they did the listening in. At about the same time as they were going through the call process to call a senior pastor. It's a beautiful time to do it because actually, the MSP, which stands for Ministry Site Profile, that a congregation has to fill out for the synod office to actually find you a good pastor. A lot of the information you need for the Ministry Site Profile, you will get by doing the listening process. So it was a good fit for them. So they did all that, and they called a new senior pastor. When the new senior pastor came, he said, I wasn't here when you did this. I'd like us to do the listening out again. Because they were committed from the listening out that they needed to add an associate pastor who was a Latino pastor. In Texas, our demographics are 70% of people under age 21 are Latino. Are you hearing that? 70% of people under age 21 are Latino. So blink your eyes, and you'll see what Texas will look like. And so we're foolish in the Lutheran Church if we aren't noticing this. We're foolish. And this is a great opportunity for us. Anyway, so they were all focused on that and ready to go. But because they had a new senior pastor, because they wanted to listen to him, and by the way, because they were moving with his help from out of breath to growing, and everybody was feeling it. The goodwill, the more people coming, they started a young parents group. Things were starting to look up and starting to grow. Worship attendance was getting a little bit better with this new pastor. They listened to him and they did the listening out again with his help. In that listening out, they discovered, and honestly I don't know why they had to do it. If they'd looked at the faces of the kids in their preschool, they would have known this. But Bel Air happens to be an amazing population of Mandarin-speaking people. No kidding. This is where the Chinese people in the city of Houston live, is in the Bel Air community. By the way, growing in the United States, beyond Anglo and Latino, is Mandarin-speaking people. That's the next coming up demographic, not just in my community. Wow. So they had to really shift their thinking. And I want to tell you, half the listening team was ticked because they really had their heart set on the Latino ministry. I mean, they really did. And they had to let go of it. It was hard. And so they ended up calling, for the first time, I have to tell you how proud I am of my congregation. For the first time in the history of this congregation that has sometimes had 3 pastors, they ended up calling a pastor to not serve themselves. I'm serious. They called the only Mandarin-speaking Lutheran pastor in the ELCA. Yeah, he was in North Dakota. Where there are no Chinese people. I know, in the wisdom of the ELCA, he lived in North Dakota. Poor Pastor Tan. But we have you know what? His English is hard to understand. I can do it, but my husband can't. But maybe it's the distraction of the grandkids, but he really cannot. He's like, man, because they record the sermons, my husband will listen to it again. Because if he listens to it like sitting at his computer and concentrating, he can hear it. He's brilliant. You want to hear what he has to say, but his accent is a little hard. And so there are people in the congregation who wrestle with his accent, for sure. But you know what? They are committed to reaching the Mandarin speaking community. I don't know what's happened to my church. This is like such a different church. It's awesome. And here's the thing. Last January, we had a Chinese New Year celebration for the first time in Faith Lutheran Church. And they were thinking they'd have like maybe 100, 150 people come to this thing. You know, some members, some people from the Chinese Bible study and their families, maybe some people from the day school who are Chinese. You guys, they had 760 people. I know! They were like blown away. They were like completely out of food. They were like freaking out. You know, the members were like running to the store to get stuff. It was like, oh my gosh. So we're doing the right thing, right? God is blessing this. And I gotta tell you, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have put a dime on this as a bet. You just don't know what God can do. You really don't know what can happen when you have the courage to try new things. I'm serious. It's shocking. Well, I've got lots of other stories. If we have time, I'll close with a really great one, but I don't want to keep us too late. So here's the third thing I learned on the Inca Trail to wrap up our time, okay? It's one step at a time, really. It's one step at a time. I mean, I don't know why the Incans put so many blessed little rocks together on the trail. And I walked in every single one of them, I think. And it was just an amazing spiritual journey for me as I went on this pilgrimage through Peru. That's my favorite shot, by the way. And I actually made it. My before and after shots are pretty bad. I lost 8 pounds. It was like such a big deal. I know. It was really hard. But I want to say this. In the end, getting to Machu Picchu, it took my breath away. Now, I had actually been there by bus twice, by train and bus twice. The hiking there was a whole different experience. As I was approaching, and you could see it, with every step I could see it coming in front of me, you know, through the trees. I felt like it came too fast. Like the ending just showed up faster than I thought it would. It was an absolutely fantastic experience. But as hard as it had been, and as much as I learned about myself, and you guys are only getting 3 of my highlights, there's more on my blog, I could talk about it all day, it really was only one step at a time, is the truth. So you have been great listeners this morning. I hope this is helping